In 1897, the small and unassuming town of Aurora, Texas made national headlines. Around 6 a.m. on the morning of April 17th, according to multiple newspapers, a UFO crashed on a farm in Aurora. Among the debris were the remains of a small humanoid believed to be the pilot of the craft. Later that day, the being was given a Christian burial in the town cemetery. However, questions remain and sources conflict on certain details. Some sources claim it was nothing more than a very well thought out, very elaborate hoax. On the other hand, there is some evidence to suggest this amazing story may actually be true. Whatever the case, the debate has continued for well over a century as to what really happened that day. There seemed to be a spike in UFO activity over the West Coast starting back in 1896. The ration sightings, now known as the Great Airship Mystery of 1896 and 97, would eventually spread eastward. Various newspapers reported on the multitude of UFO sightings during this time frame. Some articles even mentioned eyewitness accounts of UFOs landing. While interesting, these accounts would mostly be lacking in terms of any sort of tangible evidence. That is, until the 1897 event in Aurora. The land on which the alleged UFO crash took place was owned by Judge J.S. Proctor. Prior to hitting the ground, the craft struck and destroyed a tall wooden structure on the property. Most sources claim the tall wooden structure the UFO hit was a windmill. According to others, the wooden tower was a windlass, the hoist used in wells to lower and raise buckets of water. Windmill or windlass, sources agree that there was some sort of tall wooden structure on the property that was destroyed on the date of the alleged crash. Judge Proctor's nearby flower garden was also destroyed by whatever fell out of the sky. According to testimony, several local residents went to Judge Proctor's property to assist in any way they could just following the crash. This was when they discovered the disfigured body of the lone pilot. A grave was dug, and a makeshift tombstone was made. An etching was made on the tombstone depicting the cigar-shaped craft to honor the deceased alien. Some accounts speak of a sort of paper with strange hieroglyphics being found among the bits of twisted metal, but no evidence of that paper can be found today. The bulk of the debris appeared to be various forms of metal, much of which being described as silvery aluminum. With the help of a few other local residents, the wreckage was eventually cleared from the crash site. Much of it was said to have been dumped into Judge Proctor's well. In 1945, the property was bought by the Oates family. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Oates removed the metallic debris from the well. Unfortunately, no one seems to know where he disposed of it after that. However, a few of the smaller fragments from the crash site had been saved. As previously mentioned, there is some interesting evidence to support certain aspects of this case. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, let's consider the story from a skeptical viewpoint. As is the case with any paranormal topic, there were several known hoaxes associated with the Great Airship Mystery of 1896 and 97. But the town of Aurora specifically may very well have had a motive to stage such a hoax. An infestation destroyed local cotton crops. Cotton was one of the town's major sources of revenue. A massive fire claimed the lives of several townspeople, as well as reducing multiple buildings to rubble. After the tragic fire, a spotted fever epidemic wiped out much of the town's remaining population. Lastly, the construction of a planned railroad line ended up bypassing the town. This was significant because had the tracks gone through Aurora, it could have brought much needed commerce to the struggling town. All these factors combined had significant negative implications to the town's well-being. With a dwindling population and stunted economic growth, they could have been staging a hoax as a potential opportunity to save the town. Such an incredible event would certainly encourage tourism and thus have a positive effect on the town's economy. In addition to this, Judge Proctor did have a reputation for being a bit of a jokester. Even so, these factors still only amount to consequential evidence in support of the hoax theory. While there may have been motive, and Judge Proctor was known for his occasional pranks, there is still no definitive proof that the Aurora crash had been staged. Author and UFO investigator Jim Marrs has extensively studied the Aurora case. Miss Oates claimed that for many years she could never get anything to grow in the spot believed to have been the point of impact. Naturally, Marrs wanted to see the location up close. While observing it, he was struck by the lack of healthy vegetation within its perimeter. While natural vegetation flourished just outside the alleged impact site, the sparse vegetation within it was sickly in appearance, its growth seemingly stunted. Though the circular patch of barren ground was a bit peculiar, he admits that he was unable to find any solid proof that an impact had taken place there. Several samples believed to have come from the crash were eventually analyzed at the University of North Texas in Denton. Nothing particularly out of the ordinary was found in most of the fragments. However, according to Marrs, one piece in particular would prove to have a rather peculiar property. The metallic fragment was determined to be approximately 75% iron and 25% zinc, with tiny amounts of a few other trace elements. Nothing is unusual about this composition. What was unusual about it, according to Marrs, was that the fragment displayed absolutely no magnetic properties. Now, I did a little digging to find out exactly how anomalous non-magnetic iron would be, and this is what I found. Generally speaking, one would expect that a sample composed mostly of iron would be magnetic, but in certain forms and under certain conditions, the magnetic properties of iron can be diminished. Without knowing more about the sample in question, it's unclear as to whether or not the sample truly was anomalous. As such, the significance of its lack of magnetic properties cannot be determined. Either way, there are other aspects to the Aurora case that I find far more interesting. We'll pick up there in a moment. Without question, the most exciting aspect is the possibility that the Aurora Cemetery is the final resting place of a bona fide alien. In the 1970s, an investigation was launched to determine the truth about the legendary grave. The investigation was led by a respected journalist named Bill Case. In addition to being a writer for the Dallas Times-Herald, Mr. Case also served as the Texas State Director of the Mutual UFO Network. Using a metal detector over the grave, he determined that there were at least 3 metal fragments buried with whatever else had been buried in the small grave. Case and his team then sought permission to have the grave exhumed, but their request was denied. Since then, many others have tried to obtain legal authorization to dig up the grave as well. To date, every request to do so has been denied. As such, it is impossible to verify with certainty what's buried there. This no doubt makes it all the easier for the ardent skeptic to brush the whole thing off as a hoax. But if nothing's there, then why not just allow investigators to dig up the spot? If alien remains are there, the repeated denials certainly make it look like someone's trying to hide something. There's certainly no shortage of conspiracy theories about government cover-ups pertaining to UFOs and aliens. Could denials have anything to do with that? Who knows? Let's consider a few other possible reasons that have been offered. For one, it's an old and historic cemetery. Skeptics might not want the scenic grounds to be tarnished by what they perceive as a frivolous pursuit to prove some mythical legend. Others have said the denials were due to health concerns for the current residents of the town. After all, several people buried at the cemetery had died from highly contagious diseases. Why should that concern be applied to the alien, though? Another reason given was that they didn't want investigators to accidentally dig up the wrong grave. All of these reasons seem pretty weak. After hours of looking into it, I could only find one remotely plausible reason. It's a legal technicality that most sources on the Aurora case make absolutely no mention of whatsoever. Texas state law requires that the next of kin be notified prior to a body being exhumed. Now, obviously there's no possible way of notifying the alien's next of kin. But we're not talking about exhuming a human corpse. The law certainly wouldn't apply to digging up the carcasses of a raccoon or an armadillo. So why would it apply to any other type of non-human body? Perhaps it's a matter of semantics. We don't think of raccoons and armadillos as being people. They're just animals. But if the alien was thought of as being a person deserving of the same rights as other people, then the law could arguably be applied to the alien's body also. Whether or not the government was at work behind the scenes, I have to wonder how big of a role this legal technicality played with respect to the repeated denials. Just to make sure no one would try to dig up the grave after the initial request in the early 1970s, police were sent to guard the cemetery for several nights. The headstone was stolen the very first night the police had stopped guarding the cemetery. In addition to the missing headstone, something else would vanish as well. 3 small coring holes had been drilled into the ground directly over the 3 spots of the grave where Bill Case had detected metal. After this, Case swept the grave site with his metal detector again, but this time, no trace of metal could be found. When asked who he thought had extracted the metal, Case replied, "The government." This response came from an interview Jim Mars conducted with Case. 1 year later, Case died. Without explicitly saying so, Mars seems to make a connection between Case's interest in the alien grave and his death shortly after. The implication being that he may have been killed off for getting too close to the truth. Again, I want to stress that Mars did not explicitly say that this is what he thought happened. He just seems to cryptically imply it. So far, I haven't been able to find much information regarding exactly how Case died, but I will continue looking into it. If I find something interesting, then I will certainly include Bill Case in my ongoing series entitled The Danger of UFO Research, a Disturbing Trend. To address the claim that there's nothing buried there, a recent investigation by UFO Hunters proved otherwise. In 2013, ground-penetrating radar revealed that there was, in fact, a short grave under the gravesite. But exactly what occupies the grave remains unknown. Nowadays, Aurora is a popular destination spot for curious vacationers, and guided tours are given at the cemetery. But let's transition back to the Proctor Oates property, specifically the well on the property. The well was eventually capped, but prior to this, it was used as a primary source for drinking water. Individuals who frequently drank water from the well were known to have developed certain health issues. Extremely severe rheumatoid arthritis, cysts, and goiters were just a few of the conditions the Oates family would develop and blame on the well water. They also believed the water was radioactive. While the supposed radioactive and health deteriorating properties of the water have not been scientifically confirmed, there was some evidence that metallic debris had once been in the well. The evidence would prove quite compelling and would seemingly be corroborated by the initial eyewitness testimony, specifically pertaining to the debris. The team from UFO Hunters removed the cap to see if any metallic fragments were still there. Unfortunately, Mr. Oates had been very thorough when he removed the debris from the well after purchasing the property so many years ago. UFO Hunters were not able to find any of such debris still in the well. However, a water sample from the well proved to have unusually high levels of the same type of metal eyewitnesses of the crash site likened the debris to: aluminum. The connection to aluminum goes deeper. To this day, small bits of aluminum slag can still be found near the crash site. When tested, the aluminum was found to be a very unusual aluminum alloy. Furthermore, this particular alloy was not known to have been used by humans. The fact that bits of this alloy have even been found stuck to trees would seem to indicate that they got there while they were still molten. Jim Mars further explains that during the late 1800s, aluminum was so rare that it actually would have cost more than gold. It is therefore extremely unlikely that aluminum would have been used for a hoax. In my opinion, there may very well be something more to this case than a simple hoax. Enough evidence has been found to make it deserving of much more investigation. It certainly has the potential of being the smoking gun of all UFO cases. Even so, plenty of questions remain about its veracity. Fact or fiction, with the information currently available, one could build a pretty strong case either way. At the end of the day, it all hinges around finding out what was buried at the cemetery. I think it's only appropriate, albeit poetically ironic, to end with this. The proverbial nail in the coffin will be nothing short of pulling the nails out of the coffin to find out what's inside. Hey everyone, Drew here from Mad Cat Mysteries, and I hope you enjoyed the video you just watched. If you did, you can click on the subscribe button below. I'd appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.